What began as a casual meeting turned out to be one of the most self realized moments of my life. Before, during, and after our conversation, I grew as the discussion evolved. I had met someone that had more experience than me, had been traveling Mexican longer than Yo, but there was a connection of two longtime fellow travelers who love Mexico, and so we share our experiences. Chuck Burton is one of the most kind, intelligent, happy, and self aware individuals I have had the pleasure to meet since my transition to Mexico and in all my life. I love this guy and I love his story. I have nicknamed him Mexico's Gringo Magico. Sit tight, watch this episode, and I promise it will emotionally affect how you feel about the beloved home we call Mexico. We're going to start with the pros and cons about Mexico. Chuck's been here a lot longer than me, but I've lived in Mexico permanently now for a little over 7 years, and I've been traveling here since I was a teenager. So I'm now 60 and Chuck's 74. So we've been around the block a little bit. Let's start with the pros. Obviously, I think the first thing that comes to mind for everybody is the food. The food's absolutely fantastic in Mexico. One of the things I notice is that it's a lot less processed and there's not as much genetic processing. So I know we both buy a lot of food at Mercados. You were telling me the other day about there's not so many little markets in the northern states like Sonora.
The type of central markets where everybody sells fruit and vegetables and all kinds of stuff that you find throughout Mexico, which are very, very colorful places, don't tend to exist in the desert towns in the north because they don't grow all their own stuff. So everything is shipped in and it's in supermarkets. But the rest of the country, that's true. Food is wonderful in Mexico. It's fresh, it's great, it's very inexpensive relative to North America. And Mexican food is one of the wonderful cuisines in the world. Most people in the United States and Canada when they think about Mexican food, they think about what they find in restaurants there, which is basically a form of Mexican food called Tex-Mex. Enchiladas, tacos, all the stuff you're familiar with. But as you go through the country and into the central regions and down the south and then the jungles and all that, you'll find much more variation in cuisine than that. And true Mexican cuisine, which only barely resembles what you would think of as Tex-Mex. My favorite thing about Mexico above anything else is it's just laid back and stress-free and slow compared to life in our countries.
Absolutely, I agree with that too. And part of that stress-free, easygoing life is the freedom here. There's so much more freedom than we're used to having in the United States.
It's funny because the United States is everybody extols how much it's a freedom and liberty country, but the fact is that there's so many rules and regulations in the U.S. that you find out now. Like for instance, you can't grow vegetables on your front lawn in the U.S. in a lot of places. You always have to have your animals on a leash. I live near in the summer, a beautiful marshland in a park, and there's a sign with 40 rules about that park and when you can go into it and you can't go in there at night, et cetera, et cetera. And signs and rules are much less prevalent in Mexico. And even when there are signs and rules, the Mexicans don't always like to follow them. They're very individualistic and they follow the ones they want, particularly traffic rules.
Yeah, without a doubt, there's way too many rules and regulations in the United States. You can't walk down the beach with your dog. Here, we do it all the time. Much less for those of you that enjoy a beer on the beach. You can do that here. You can't in the United States. I think it's illegal all over California. Alcohol on the beach. Well, including dogs. You can't even walk with your dog.
I grew up near the free beaches of free clothing optional beaches near Santa Cruz, California, and so there's not a lot of rules there either.
I think
the rules might be there,
yeah.
But I haven't been there in a long time. The U.S. more and more, it seems like everybody's rushing around doing stuff, stressed, having to get places, worried about this and that. That's not the way things really operate in Mexico. The other thing, particularly right now in the United States, there's a political division that's absolutely toxic, no matter which side you are on it or if you're not involved in it all, and constant anger and upset and emotions that are stoked by the media That's another thing that doesn't really exist in Mexico. Most people are a little poor and they're more concerned with just getting by, and they don't like to fight and they don't have to, like, to have conflict. I just love the atmosphere in this country. I love walking down the street and having people that you know call out to you. I love the fact that there's always people on the street. There's always people selling stuff. There's always people meandering around. There's color everywhere. Our suburban streets in the U.S. are empty. There's just so many things that I've always just appreciated about Mexico, even if it's not as clean and it's not as organized. I don't care. It just feels much more comfortable and home-like.
Without a doubt, it's a relaxed situation here. But you've traveled the world a lot more than mine. But he does call Mexico home, specifically Mazatlan. That's part of the slower paced life and less stress, as he was saying.
Mazatlan is, and Mexico, Mexican people are extremely friendly. Sometimes they're shy, but if you talk to them, they open up and they're always want to be helpful. If you need any help, if you're out on the street, if you're lost or anything, whether you speak their language or not, they'll always want to help you. They're extremely generous. They'll give you the shirt off their back. Mexican people are extremely sweet. This is not the picture you get. There is horrendous violence in this country, driven by the cartels and the drug entities, but that's not really the personality of this country. You get away from those small areas and it's very, very peaceful and friendly, easy, and you don't worry about walking around. So the personality of Mexico that's portrayed in the media, which is sensationalistic, is not really the true personality of the country. I mean, you can't even talk too much about how sweet most Mexicans are.
It's really amazing. If you're broken down on the side of the road or pushing a motorcycle or whatever you need help with, somebody's going to stop and help you here. I can't remember the last time I saw that in the United States. When was the last time you were in Canada?
Oh, I usually go there every summer or so.
You go up?
Take a trip. It's not very far from our summer home.
I haven't been to much since I was in my 20s, so it's been a long time. Just like everything, it all changes a lot.
Well, everything changes. I'll give a very kind of amusing example. I'm an old guy. If I walked up to some teenage girls on a beach in the United States, they would unlikely to be friendly. They would be suspicious. They would wonder what the hell was going on. But if I walk up and talk to teenage girls on a Mexican beach, they're just always friendly and answer back, and they're very happy that I'm speaking Spanish to them. They see I'm probably a foreigner, and there's no suspicion, there's no worry, there's no upset. It's very, very difficult to convey how much more relaxed the attitudes in this country, which is why I love to live here.
I couldn't have said it any better than that. Okay, let's cover the cost of living. The cost of living in Mexico is far less expensive than the United States. Everything, food, real estate, medical care, it's changing rapidly. It's gone up a lot in the 7 years I've been here, but it's still crazy less expensive. I don't like the word cheap. I use the word inexpensive. How do you feel about that?
Well, we have inflation here and change after the pandemic and all the forces in the world like everywhere else, and prices are going up, and it's very, very hard on the people here. And a lot of the people that come here to retire, some of them think they don't have very much money. I always am suspicious of them because if they're here, they're way richer than most of the Mexicans, but they don't see it that way. At the same time, prices are very low. My objection to most travel literature, travel videos, travel books, travel advice, when they talk about moving to a country like Mexico, the implicit attitude is that people are going to want to come down to Mexico and live an upper middle class American lifestyle. Well, each to his own. People can do that if they want, and if they have the money to do that, I don't have any objections one way or another. That's just not the way I've ever looked at the world. I've always lived in voluntary simplicity. You can live in Mexico and you can spend a lot of money, and you can have servants, and you can have a big house on the beach, and you can go out to expensive restaurants, and you can do all that stuff, and you can spend a lot of money. If you're a person of lesser means, maybe living on a limited social security or something like that, it's amazing how inexpensively you live in Mexico if you don't want to try to live that lifestyle. If you just want to have a modest house or apartment away from a beach town up in the mountains, or even away from the beach in a beach town like this, your prices will be reduced by 60 or 70% of what you're going to pay on the beach. If you buy in the markets and you buy local and you know what you're doing, you can bring your food costs down. utility costs, except for here in the summer where I don't spend, where air conditioning is very expensive, utility costs are very, very low. You don't need heat. You don't need a lot of things. There's so many ways that you need less money to spend in Mexico. So it's inexpensive, an inexpensive life, or as expensive as you want and pretty much inexpensive as you want. Most of the country, if you want to go to a area that's not a tourist area, and there's so many beautiful small towns in Mexico, it's unbelievable how many there are. You want to go to a place like that, you can rent or you can buy real estate for a fraction of what you would pay in the States, and you could live for a fraction of what you can live in the States. It's no joke that a person absolutely could live in Mexico comfortably for $1,000 US a month or less, even now in the time of inflation.
How does that sound? One of the things I love about Mexico is the public transportation system is fantastic here. It is so inexpensive and very easy to catch a bus or a taxi, or depending on what city you're in, an Uber.
I don't care to have a car in Mexico for a lot of reasons. I don't like the traffic. I don't like the parking. Traffic is bad in the cities. Gas is quite expensive. It's more than the US. You can ride the back roads, which are very interesting. They're not necessarily in good condition, but if you take the main highways, you pay tolls that are not cheap. There's a new highway they built in the last 8 years from the city of Durango down here to Mazatlán, which is an engineering marvel, and it's a beautiful new highway. But to go that 150 miles or so is 100 miles round trip just in tolls. The public transportation, we don't need it here in city. Any city in Mexico, you've got a lot of buses that go everywhere, all over the city. We have 3 or 4 buses that run by a couple blocks from our building. You'll have a bus go by every 5 or 10 minutes. They're inexpensive. They take you almost anywhere in the city. You might have to change. If you want to do something that's easier, a lot of people use Ubers or what they call pulmonillas, which are open air carts.
Yeah, it's an open air. It's like a converted Volkswagen. We'll show you a picture right here.
Tuk-tuk. All of this is very expensive, especially if you're not spending money maintaining a car. You don't worry about getting around. But all over Mexico, most people don't have cars, and anywhere they live, there's going to be a bus that goes by. People have to get somewhere, and there's buses everywhere. For me, as a permanent resident in Mexico with a senior card, I ride all over Mexico for half price on the great bus system. The buses are much more comfortable than the buses in the US. They're not like an old Greyhound. They're just lovely, and they'll take you anywhere you want to go. And I travel all over Mexico on a bus, and it's extremely inexpensive. I don't know what the prices are now. 3 years ago, I took a 2,000-mile round-trip loop from Guadalajara to Guadalajara and visited a lot of small towns and small cities. So this 2,000 miles on my half-price bus fare wound up costing me $113 in fares.
Wow.
And on nice buses.
Yeah, the buses here are very different than in the U.S. It's nothing like Greyhound. They're super comfortable.
So I don't want a car here. I find a car stressful and expensive in Mexico. When I travel, I don't want to have to worry about whether I'm going to get lost or if I'm following the signs. Some of the transit is very confusing, and then you have to park. It's not worth it to me anymore, and I don't do it.
But he doesn't have dogs.
I don't have dogs. We had a cat, but she didn't ride around the car.
Yeah, most cats don't.
But transportation is one of the very, very best things about Mexico. And even if you live out in the country, you can get where you're going without a car.
I want to talk about the family bond and relationships in Mexico. I grew up in Southern California, which is a really busy, high-bristling. By the time the kids are 18 or at least 17, they're out of the house, off doing their own thing, whether they're going to college somewhere or being in a new job or starting a relationship. It's not very close, tight, fit families. Usually when one of the parents pass away, the families are gone. There's exceptions. I'm saying generalizations here, but when I moved to Mexico, I was amazed at how close the family is here. They're apart. They're a pack, like the dogs and I. We're a pack. We don't go anywhere without each other. They do everything together, except for bathing, and I'm not too sure about that either. I don't know. But it's so heartwarming to see for me, for somebody that we had a good family, but we were nothing like this very close. And it's just puts a big smile on my face and warms my heart to watch how much time they spend together and everything that they enjoy together. And it could be the simplest things. They could be literally just sitting in a chair out in their backyard drinking a beer together with other neighbors that come by. It doesn't have to be skiing in Colorado or skydiving from Paris. It could be anything. Just being together, what it's all about. I guess it's kind of the relationship I have with my dogs. They don't care what I'm doing, they just want to be there.
Of course, what freedom says doesn't really apply to daily life. People go to their own pursuits, their jobs, their schools, their shops. Mexicans, especially ones that are not very well off, live in extended families in a house, and generally everybody in the family does something to help, whatever they can do, whatever it is. But the extended family is paramount. When it comes to leisure hours, people are together, they share their houses, they share activities. When they go traveling, you often see big extended Mexican families in one hotel room, and they're out in their beach partying together, and it is very, very warm and loving. No question about it. It's changing in modern times, but still that's a basis. One of the reasons that I find Mexican people are so open and warm and friendly is they have the security of their families, their friends, their communities. They have a place, even if they're poor, they have people around them that care about them, and they all take care of each other. That's something that's absolutely missing in our culture for the most part.
Safety. The United States State Department constantly puts out warnings about travel to the United States. In fact, since I started
Mexico.
About travel to Mexico, thank you. Since I started commercially coming down here, I've been coming to Mexico with my family since I was a little kid, for as long as I can remember. But we started coming on separate vacations, me and the family, when I was about 13. And I can remember the U.S. State Department warnings way back there. It's unsafe to go to Mazatlan or Acapulco, Puerto Vallarta, or Cancun. Everything was unsafe. It still is. There's no change.
According to the State Department.
According to the State Department, exactly.
Okay, the State Department advisories are a way of the government covering their own ass. They don't want to have to help their citizens abroad. They don't want their citizens getting into what they call unpleasant situations. The people that write these advisories are not in any country. They're not in Mexico. They don't know what anything is like on the ground. We had some upset here a couple of years ago, an incident. I'm not going to go into the details of it, and the whole city closed down for one day. The American consulate closed down for 4 days. Everything went back to normal here very quickly, but they were told they couldn't go to the office. It's just silly. I've been traveling all over Mexico with a backpack and on buses and trains and everything for 50 years. I've had stuff stolen from me like it can happen in any other place. I've never been afraid. I've never been threatened with violence. The closest I've had to unpleasantness of any kind like that is with drunks, which can happen anywhere. There are areas in Mexico that have horrendous violence. This is areas that cartels are in conflict. They're mostly on transportation routes and in the northern areas and in the border areas. Unless you know what you're doing, you should keep away from those areas. But here we are in the state of Sinaloa. The State Department says the state of Sinaloa is dangerous. You should only go to Mazatlan and only stay within a mile on the beach. You shouldn't go anywhere else. That's nonsense. I've been coming here for 50 years. I've traveled all over Sinaloa by car, by bus. I've never had any threatening incident or unpleasantness and anybody bothering me ever, and that's including right now.
Even the drunks are happy.
Well, you know, what's dangerous about cartels is if there's two cartels fighting each other. This area is controlled by one cartel. They have no competition. They make sure nobody bothers the tourists, the foreigners, older foreigners. The cartels do not want anybody bothering their customers. They don't allow anybody within their organization to bother foreigners.
Do you want to explain why?
We're their customers, we're their clients.
Right.
We don't know what businesses have cartel money. They have hundreds of millions of dollars they have to launder. It's all a mystery around here. All you know is that crime against foreigners is extremely rare here. You don't do stupid things. You don't go out tonight to places you don't know. You don't go around wearing fancy watches and jewelry on the streets. But walking around the cities I've been doing for 50 years, I have never, ever felt menaced in any way. Ever.
It's a beautiful place here. It's really, I feel safer here than I do in the United States.
Absolutely, in a city setting, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I've never heard of a school shooting here when they happen every week in the United States.
Well, they don't happen every week in the U.S. The point is, in Mexico, nobody shoots up a school, a church, a shopping center, or anything like that. If there's crime, there's a reason for it, and it's usually based upon these entities that are competing. There's some states where there's some bad competition over timber and avocados. There's drug stuff. It's really bad stuff. But if you're away from that stuff, which you are in most of Mexico, particularly in the central mountains, in the small towns and cities, and in the southern part of the country, the violent crime rate is extremely low compared to the United States. And very, very few people in Mexico, besides the army, the government, the police, and the cartels, have guns. So there's very, very little street crime involving guns, and nobody goes around shooting anybody except for people they're fighting with about stuff that we don't want to be involved with.
With that, I want to add to that about Mazatlan has some huge parties here. They have, I mean, let's begin with Carnival. I've been to Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and there's 1.5 million drunk people that get violent. I've been on the streets of Mazatlan during Carnival, and there's 1.5 million drunk people. And well, they don't drink like they do in Mardi Gras. It's not about the party. It's really about the tradition here. And I was afraid in New Orleans here now. And New Orleans is a great town. Don't get me wrong. I love New Orleans. The people are super friendly, probably some of the friendliest in all of the United States. But here, I was never scared. Walking around with my camera gear, filming everything for this wonderful channel. I loved it. So now I've been through 2 carnivals, and I will continue to go back.
There's a lot of holidays and festivals here. There's Semana Santa, which is Easter week. You've got the holidays around Christmas and the processions. You've got Carnival.
Motorcycle week.
Yeah, you got motorcycle week.
They've got the
triathlon. There's lots of holidays. There's lots of partying. People drink a lot of beer, but they're usually happy. You don't see a lot of conflict. You don't hear trouble. My honey and I, we're older. We just like to quiet. We don't go out much, to be honest. So we don't participate in that stuff. But I have, and I've seen it over the years. One of the most beautiful weeks in Mexico is the week surrounding where we have Halloween in the U.S. November 1st is the Day of the Dead in Mexico, but the festivities go on for a week, and there's just beautiful art and costumes and everything that goes on for a week. It's actually, I think, the nicest week in the whole country, and it's quiet because it's not a major party week. But there's always colorful stuff going on in Mexico.
Dia de Muertos is the week long. Think of that. October 30th through November 2nd. Every year, it's a massive celebration. A must see. A must see. I've got videos on it if you want to watch it.
You were talking about pros and cons at one.
Right. So yeah, we're still on the pros.
Well, we're still on the pros.
So I think I've covered. You anything else you want to add to pros? Like, because these are generalizations, and I'm going to make a statement.
Everything is, of course, a generalization. I mean, first of all, yes, as pros, people go to Europe because there's art and architecture and history and museums and natural wonders all over Europe, and people flock to them. There's a problem because there's too many tourists in too many places. Well, Mexico has all the same stuff that Europe has, and it's bigger. And yet most of it is unvisited by foreigners. You can be on your own almost all over the country. And there's so much art in Mexico, it would make our country ashamed. There's so many museums. There's so much history and beautiful old architecture and buildings and cathedrals. There's over 4,000 registered archaeological sites in Mexico. The history here is staggering. All of it is cheap to visit. For me, as a senior with a card, almost all of it's free to visit. The natural wonders in Mexico, the mountains, the volcanoes, the jungles, the beaches. You've got the Pacific beaches with all the surf. You've got the blue, beautiful Caribbean beaches. You've got spectacular desert scenery like you do have in Arizona and so on in northern Mexico. Mexico has got it all. It's got something for everybody. And that's one of the big pros of the country, and until it changes, because people are scared and intimidated by the image of Mexico, most of the country you travel with, you won't even see other foreigners. One of the things that Mexico's got is a program called Pueblos Mágicos, Magic Towns, which the government established about 20 years ago to preserve the heritage and history of the country. Most of these towns are small towns that are not even well known. And there's now 177 of them, and they're just beautiful, well-kept, clean, friendly, cheap, safe, and for the most part untouristed. And I travel around to magic towns. There's now 177. I've been in 74, and it's just a delightful project.
74, wow.
And most of the time you don't see anybody that's a foreigner.
Something to think about, folks. Seriously, you're missing so much. But that, you know, you sparked an idea in my head that's not on the list, but the climate. So before I moved here, you have an idea about Mexico, and just besides the things that we're talking about, as the climate goes, I was thinking of Baja, California, which is pretty much desert and
Hot
cactus.
desert, yeah.
You know, that's all you think of. But the mainland of Mexico is completely different. There's mountains up here where it's cold year round. But some cities at 8,000 foot elevation. It's higher than Denver, right?
Not necessarily cold, but not real warm. How about that?
Right, you know.
Some of them are wet, yeah.
Yeah, things you wouldn't think of. It's a very mountainous region, the central parts of Mexico.
Well, you got every climate in Mexico, but many months of the year are extremely pleasant. Even here, I live on the beach, and we have a gorgeous, very consistent climate for about 7 months a year. Dry, sunny, very little rain. In the winter months of December and January, the typical high temperature is 73 or 74. Your typical low temperature is around 54. Now we're in one of the most beautiful months of the year, May. The typical high temperature is about 83, and the typical low is about 67. But still very comfortable, and it's dry. Now, the months here in the summer are just like Florida, Louisiana. They're torrid, they're wet, they're hot. Most people don't stay, we don't stay. But although most people just go back to their homes, even the ones that live here most of the year, I only go in the dead of summer up to the United States personally. And some of the months in the summer down here on the beach, I travel in the mountains in Mexico because there's so much stuff to see. And the climate in October and November is very lovely, even though it's still sort of hot season and still wet season. It's very lovely even in those months and throughout the country. But you can have any climate you want, because it's obviously a lot warmer in the south and in the Yucatan on the beaches, and up in the mountains it's cooler. And as I said, here for most of the year we have a lovely consistent climate.
Okay, let's talk about the cons.
Okay, well, there's things about Mexico. If you move down here, particularly to live, and you want to bring your culture with you, you may be in for a shock, because you can't do it. One of the things I like to say about Mexico is it's random. You think something's going to be consistent. You learn how certain people are doing things, or a certain workman is doing things, or stuff like that, or certain rules, and then you find out, nope, somebody else has a different idea. You have to really, if you live in Mexico, you have to let go of the idea that things are going to be efficient, organized, on time. When you're getting repairs or you're interfacing with the Mexicans to have any kind of service or work done, sometimes it doesn't go smoothly. In fact, often things don't go smoothly here. And if that's the thing that's if you're a type A person and this is going to upset you, you're going to have a hard time living in Mexico. There are tips to help with this, but it can be hard. But mostly you just have to be like the Mexican people. Mexican people shake their head and they say, ni modo, what can you do? Things just don't necessarily always work. I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't get spectacular service in this country. You do. You get great workmanship at much less price. They do wonderful work. Some people are very conscientious about showing up on time. Some people aren't. There's the factor of randomness. There's things you can do about that. But you know, if you're a person that's going to get frustrated if things don't work perfectly, Mexico is going to be a hard uphill struggle for you. I agree. That's a number one con. Freedom talks about the drivers as a con because he drives all the time. I don't mess with that because I get around in Ubers and public transportation and buses. I don't have to worry about it. But actually, from my experience traveling all over the world, Mexican drivers are actually pretty polite about giving you the right of way, about letting you in, but they're also wild. You know, okay, number 2 con for me in Mexico, besides that, if you're a person that's bothered by disorganization and things not being on time, number 2 con is is the noise. Now, we're very, very fortunate. We live out of town on the beach and we don't have noise besides the beautiful ocean you might hear in the background here. But in the towns in Mexico, people like to party. They're not considerate of their neighbors. They'll play music to all kinds of times of the night, particularly on holidays and weekends.
Way past
Traffic
when
is
the sun
loud.
comes up.
You know, if you want to live a quiet life in Mexico, you have to go out and live somewhere quiet, away from the cities or something like that, or you have to get used to it, or you have to find a solution like we do. But if you're bothered by noise, noise is a problem in Mexico.
And it's not just the parties too. It could be a construction site next to you.
Yeah.
It could be just the traffic noise. The buses are really loud.
We've talked
people
talked
pull
about
up to their houses and they honk, right?
Oh,
they're just going to pull up and honk to let them know they're
this is
there.
all over the world of experiences. Now, we've talked about how the Mexican people are so wonderful. Mexican people are very formally polite. They always will call to you when you pass a friend. They will always say greetings. If I get into a collective van or even a bus, people will usually say good morning. People, if you go into a restaurant, people will say good hello to you. When you leave a restaurant, you say provecho to people, which means enjoy or have a good meal. People are very, very formal about all these things. At the same time, people are not necessarily considerate. They don't worry if they are making a mess or they're making too much noise. They don't think about you. They don't worry about you if they happen to cut you off in traffic. It's not a country where personal consideration is a big deal. So this is almost
And that
a
includes
contrast.
personal space.
Personal space. Yeah. So I mean,
I think part we can include in that is being the trash and the pollution
Okay.
are kind of.
now pollution can be bad in other parts of many parts of Mexico, but it's bad in the United States too. And the Mexican people want to make this better. The government wants to make this better, and they're working on it. But I mean, you know, it can be dispiriting to see people throw garbage by the side of the road some places. But so that's something that may or may not be a problem. We've talked peripherally about traffic. Traffic is a pain in the ass. All these old cities were not built for car traffic.
No.
Lots of one-way streets. There's lots of narrow streets. It can be hard getting around. Another reason I don't drive. Now, one of the real annoyances about driving, particularly, or even riding the bus, if you're in backcountry Mexico, is something called topes or vibradores. Topes are big bumps that speed bumps that are put in the road. Vibradores are things that will rattle your tires if you go over them, so they're not nearly as much of a problem. Sometimes if you're driving in small towns and rural areas in Mexico, it's just there's constant speed bumps, and it just makes it slow going.
Unmarked, unpainted.
Well, the biggest problem with it, and this is something I don't understand, and Mexicans don't think the same way we do. Somebody in their little town, they put up a speed bump, or they put it up before you get to their house because they want to protect their house or their kids or something like that. Well, this is fine. That's their business. But why don't they give you a warning sign? I don't understand about what the point of having a speed bump is if you don't tell people it's coming. They'll just be tooling along at 30, 40 miles an hour, and suddenly you run into this horrible bump, and that just is insane to me. So, but I mean, one of the real annoyances about Mexico are the topes. The last thing is very personal. I don't like Mexican music. Mariachi, banda, whatever it is, all the wailing and the crying, and it's not melodic, and I don't like it, and I've just ignored it for 50 years, and but you're going to hear it in places, you're going to hear it in noisy places, and you either love it or you don't love it. It's just a part of Mexico. It's just not for me. One of the things I really liked traveling up into these beautiful towns in the mountains, these magic towns, is there's so many people playing classical music it may be loud, but it's nice. See, we live in an area where people vacation, and so you're going to have the type of music I don't like. And it's often bad in a very nice restaurant. You want to have a nice, peaceful meal in a restaurant, but you can't because the people are walking around selling their songs, and it's loud in there. And so it is.
So Mazatlan's located in the state of Sinaloa, and Sinaloa is very famous for the style of music called banda. And it's loud. It is not rhythmic to me. It's not melodic to me. I've really tried. I've tried dancing to it. I've been on several dates where we go to clubs where they play banda music and try to learn how to dance, and I just don't understand it. And most of Mexico doesn't. If you're not from Sinaloa, most of them don't get it. But anyway.
Every country has problems. This country has a problem in certain areas with crime and cartels. The main things that you really have to know is things don't work the way you want them to work. They don't necessarily go on time. And it's noisy. If those things are hard for you to deal with, you might not be so happy in Mexico.
It's definitely a completely different culture. It's night and day. It's not just a line in the sand called the border. It is a completely different world there. And in our opinion, it's way better because we live here.
I've been coming here for 50 years. I've toiled very, very, very hard. Decades of effort to become totally fluent in the language. I mix with the people. I know their customs. I know many things about them. I know how things work in this country. At the same time, I will never understand certain things about how Mexicans are. Never. And it's okay.
It is.
Because we just don't think the same way. It's truly a different culture, even if we're right next to each other. One of the nice things about Mexico is they have sayings called dichos. The most famous dicho in Mexico is Pobre Mexico tan lejos de Dios, tan cerca de los Estados Unidos, which means poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States.
Yep, that's true.
There's lots of sayings here, and they're all to the point. One of the things that the Mexicans like to say is the Mexicans work to live and the Americans live to work. There's true. Another difference in the culture, but you could go on, and it's always fascinating to me to travel around. I go to areas full of indigenous people and different states with different cultures. This is not a homogeneous country. It's a very diverse country with diverse countries and peoples and cultures and traditions and festivals, and it's always a feast for the eyes and a feast for learning.
I want to stay a little bit on the subject of speaking Spanish. If you're coming here on vacation and you're going to one of the tourist towns or beaches, or there's going to be a lot of people in the industry, in the restaurants and the hotels that speak English. But if you're planning on moving here, please spend the time, take the time to learn Spanish. It's not that you're coming to their country. It's not their job to understand your language. And I've seen Americans and Canadians get upset when they don't speak Spanish, and they are quite embarrassing about it. It's not an easy language. It is the second fastest language in the world behind Japanese. So there's a few speed bumps, topes to go over as you're learning the language. But I've been here 7 years now, and I didn't speak any Spanish when I got here. And the first year I didn't even try. I thought I was just going to soak it in. But you do have to study and you have to learn. And in 6.5 years, I feel pretty fluent. I can discuss most things. If it was a real complicated legal matter, I would probably need some help with translation because they're not words I use very often. Or even a very complicated medical issue, I would probably want some help with translation or a contract or something along those lines. But overall, I have no problems traveling this country, speaking to anybody, whether it's in the street or a restaurant, or with the exception of a few of the really drunk people that I can't understand.
I don't completely agree with Freedom on this subject because he does travel around the country with his dogs, and if he didn't speak Spanish, his life would be a lot harder. A lot of people come to Mexico and they live in very sheltered areas. My honey doesn't speak Spanish. We live in an area where people speak English, and she goes out and shopping and she does the best she can and she has a good time at it. You can live in Mexico without speaking Spanish. I'm not urging you not to learn Spanish. I think what Freedom says is very important, is to learn some of the language. And it really opens doors. If you speak just a little bit, people are so appreciative, amazing. And if you know pleasantries and you know the polite phrases, they really, really like it. But if you're living in communities in Mexico surrounded by a lot of North Americans, you don't have to learn Spanish. That's not a reason not to learn it. Now, the biggest problem is most of the people living in Mexico that are foreigners are old people. And I'm going to tell you, it's hard for them to learn foreign language.
Of course, yeah.
Now, what I teach people, I teach some people something else. I don't try to teach people Spanish. They're not going to learn it. Even if they're motivated to learn it, they're not going to learn it very well. I teach them how to communicate with the locals. I teach them basics. I teach them basics, words, expressions, polite expressions. I say, don't use an app that's teaching foreign language because formal Spanish, because it won't help you. It's, first of all, it's not Mexican Spanish. Second of all, it's not what people speak in Mexico. People don't speak formal Spanish in Mexico, which can be very difficult. If you're speaking formal Spanish, they might not even understand you. That's not the way they talk to each other. What you need to study most is not the grammar, the formal language, or a huge vocabulary. You need to learn how to pronounce the language, which is very easy because it's totally phonetic. And once you've learned the basics, they never change on you. And then you need to learn your basic words for shopping, for going to restaurants, for meeting people and being pleasant to them. You need to learn those basics. I would encourage people to try to learn Spanish. But if you hear that you have to learn Spanish to live here comfortably, that's not true. And as older people, most of them don't try, which I disagree with, but get along fine. But it's very, very difficult for them. I started learning Spanish when I was 25, and I worked my butt off to get fluent. So it's not an easy process. So learn some Spanish, learn some basics. That's great, but don't worry about it. That's my opinion.
Okay, I just want to add, yeah, I agree with him. If you learn Spanish and come here, it will completely change your experience. 100%.
Absolutely. I love talking to Mexican people everywhere I go in this country and even in my own community. I live in a building where almost nobody speaks Spanish, which is nothing I really am very happy about, but my wife is very happy about it. But I go out into the community all the time, and I have Mexican friends, and I have my experiences, so it's not a problem for me. And Mazatlan is a great town because it's the tourist centers like Puerto Vallarta and Cabo and Cancun were just established for tourism. That's all they are. And Mazatlan is a big historical working city. It's the largest bay and port between Panama and Long Beach, California. It's got the largest shrimping industry in the world, probably. It's got lots of history, and it's got sections that are devoted to foreigners, small neighborhoods like the one that we're in now. And it's got the amenities, all the amenities you would want in the modern world. Beautiful malls, beautiful cineplexes, everything you would want. At the same time, you can very easily, in a 10-minute bus ride, get away from here and you're in the middle of a Mexican town, which is what I love and which Freedom loves. And the best of both worlds here.
Yeah, we have everything. Speaking of that, let's talk about the pros and cons, specifically of Mazatlan. Why did you choose Mazatlan to be your home? I mean, you've traveled all over Mexico.
I've traveled all over the world.
Lots. Okay, there you go.
Okay, I came to Mazatlan when I was 25. I slept in a trailer park on the sand in my sleeping bag for $1 a night. I fell in love with the city. We've got 15 miles of beautiful beaches. They're all different from each other. They're all open.
Was the Malecón here?
Well, the boardwalk has always been Malecón or boardwalk in Mazatlan. It's one of the most beautiful walks in the world, urban walks in the world. Leading to the city, which you've got the hills and you've got the 3 islands offshore. The natural beauty of the area is phenomenal. At the same time, even though it's a city with between 500,000 and 1 million people, it doesn't feel like a city. It doesn't have a downtown business area that feels like a city. It feels like a Mexican town. The whole place just feels like a big strung together Mexican town. You don't feel like you're in a city in the same way, even if it's a little bustling. People are always friendly. People come from all over Mexico to live in Mazatlan because it's such a nice place to live. It's got such a good climate. It's got such beauty to it. It's got a good economy because it's got a mixed economy. It's got your shrimp industry. It's got your beer industry. It's got your tourist industry and everything that goes together with a port. And
It is a working
yeah,
town.
it's
for
a
sure.
working town.
It's a working
It's
city.
a working
yes.
town with opportunities for foreigners to live comfortably with all the amenities they want, and yet be a part of a real Mexican place. That's why, of all the places I've been in the world, this is not necessarily my favorite place or most fascinating place or most beautiful place in Mexico. I've got a lot of places I could list, but the livability of Mazatlan is incredible. And that's why I live here in my retirement.
Activities are endless.
Lots of activities.
Just the amount of activities that come into town, like we mentioned, Carnival. Just there's so every month or something. I think it slows down in July and August. There's not too much going on.
Well, there's
during
hardly any foreigners here at that time of year. It's
No,
hot
there's not.
and wet.
It is. For me, they don't like it, but for me, it's not that bad. I've spent a couple of summers in Baja Sur, and it's crazy hot there. It's hot where you're sweating in the shower. You just can't cool off. We took the ferry across here and came here, and at Mazatlan is a lot more. It's not as sticky, even compared to Puerto Vallarta. The summers here are mellow compared to other cities. I guess I would say it that way. Anyway, sticking with pros on Mazatlan, I have to say the sunsets. One of my favorite places, the golden sunsets that take
I've
place
got
here
reams of
every
photographs.
night.
You've got the
It's-
islands to break up the ocean, and you've got the clouds, and it's phenomenal, this sunsets we get here.
Just keep going. As he mentioned, it's the shrimp capital of Mexico, possibly the world. So seafood is abundant and plentiful. Any kind of food, whatever you want, is everywhere. For me, the weather's all year round, pretty much perfect. They've got arts here.
All of Mexico has art,
Yeah.
incredible amounts of art, including street art,
Angela Peralta Theater,
opera, theater.
where's here?
We get first-run American movies in beautiful stadium seating multiplexes with state-of-the-art equipment. The senior price is $3. I go to most of the pictures nominated as Best Picture of the Year, which are in English with subtitles. Sit in a lovely, lovely theater and pay $3.
They're in English with subtitles in Spanish, correct? So even the movies are in Spanish, in English. I love that part. Isla de Piedra. If you need a vacation from Mazatlan, you take a 5 or 10 minute boat ride right across the harbor on the south side of Mazatlan, and it's not really an island.
It's an
called
old
Stola
village.
Island. It's an old village, and it's just you actually get away. It's a vacation.
A lot
from
of
Mazatlan.
little fish restaurants. You can walk on the beach for miles.
Really,
and
forever.
It's like leaving the city and going out to a Mexican village, and it takes you half hour to get there or less.
It's really amazing place to go. That cons of Mazatlan. I have to say, if you have pets, the fireworks here are almost every night. There's always some kind of fireworks going on.
no, not almost every
Well,
night.
he lives on the beach in the tourist area. I live in town, and almost every day there's firecrackers, fireworks going on. My dogs won't leave the house
That's
at night.
part of people not being so considerate. Sure.
Yeah. And I don't mind them. It's the dogs that hate them. And not everybody's
Dogs don't
hate
like it. Yeah.
Yeah, once in a while I'll run into people that have no problems with their dogs, don't have problems with fireworks. But other than that, but I have to list something as a con. You've already mentioned the noise, but that's everywhere not everywhere in Mexico. I guess any of the touristy cities.
He's going to mention sewers and construction stuff. Mazatlan is booming. For the good or bad, it's booming. It was recommended by Forbes magazine as the third best retirement destination in the world. There's a lot going on, and we have a lot of problems because this exists in most of Mexico. Although, again, if you move to small towns up in the mountains, which most foreigners are not going to do, you don't have that very peaceful life. But yeah, I mean, and things just don't necessarily work the same way that you're used to them working. Although we have plenty of growing infrastructure problems in the U.S., it's just part of modern life. So I wouldn't put that as a particular con of Mazatlan. I travel all over the world, and it's happening everywhere. I wouldn't.
No, and I agree with you on that. I have to list something as a con about Mazatlan for them. For us, it's not. For me, I appreciate the fact that a band can go out on the beach at 4 a.m. and play as loud as they want for as long as they want, because you can't do that in the country I grew up in. And I appreciate that somebody can drive down the street with their music so loud that a couple of miles of the city can hear it. because they can. That's what I see.
I'm just, we've been through a whole list of pros and cons, and I'm going to go back to where I started. Life is just pleasant here. It's just pleasant. You see a lot of smiles. People say hello to you. It's slow. It's relaxed. It's warm. It's very nice to live here. That's why I do. Basically live anywhere where I wanted to.
What can you say more than that? Mazatlan's amazing. Mexico is amazing. If you're thinking about it, it's a decision that will change your life. If you can acclimate, if you can accept the differences in culture, and you're not stuck in the way you need things to be in your day-to-day life, it's the place to be. I bet you we live longer too. I mean, look at you at 74. He's running around like he's a teenager.
Well, that's me.
You got to give some credit to Mazatlan, right? To Mexico.
That I found a nice place to live where I can live my lifestyle and be very healthy. Yes, I would.
Yeah, I saw.
This is another advantage that we didn't even talk about.
Oh, we didn't.
Okay, another very, very superior thing about living in Mexico is the service industry and the medical industry. When you get service of any kind, whether it's a manicure or a haircut or a massage, the people are right there with you. They work for a lot less money, but they are devoted to doing really good service for you. Their livelihood is very important to them. Life is harder in Mexico than most people, so you will get really taken care of in any kind of personal service in a wonderful way. You can get a great massage for $25 or $30 for over an hour. I get some people go to salons and so on for haircuts. I go to the Sunday market, which is an open air market. It has a big flea market and thieves market on Sunday.
Say the name.
The Sunday market at Juarez is one of the very special things that they have in Mazatlan. It's once a week. Suddenly you got 8 square blocks with anything you can imagine. Old Barbie dolls, old sports equipment, tools, piles of clothes with women digging through them that all cost about 50 cents a piece. I mean, it's a great market. I get my hair cut there. I go out on the sidewalk where the women come every Sunday morning and plug in their equipment, and I get a haircut for $3.
$3.
Yep. Yep. As for medical is wonderful in Mexico. You get very, very good personal service. My teeth cleaning, I got a deep, I could get my teeth cleaned for actually $25. I paid somebody $55. She does a periodontal deep cleaning. It lasted over an hour. Total personal service, extreme care, absolutely wonderful. But you can actually get your teeth cleaned for $25. Any basic medical service is great. You don't need to worry about insurance. You don't need to worry about paperwork. It's easy to make an appointment. I had a medical emergency when I was traveling in the mountains in October involving my prostate, and I needed to go to the emergency room in a hospital. I went to the public hospital and got into the emergency room. I had been unable to urinate for 3 or 4 hours, and I was in tremendous pain. I was able to convince them to push me ahead of the line because they had a triage system, and I speak good enough Spanish to explain that I was worried that my bladder could explode. They took me in there, they took care of me, and I'm a permanent resident in Mexico. I had a card, and when I was finished, I said, "Where do you pay?" They said, "You don't pay." Didn't cost me anything. I don't have insurance here. It just didn't cost me anything. Yeah, the medical service is fabulous in this country. What can I tell you? And people come here particularly for eyes and teeth and everything, but everything's good. So anyway, after I had this experience in the public hospital, I canceled the rest of the trip. I was taking to cancel my reservations, and I came back to Mazatlan. I made an appointment with the doctor the next day and saw him. We went through all the preliminaries. He had me in laser surgery a week later. The whole thing for this 2 nights in the hospital, laser surgery, the doctor, and everything else was $6,000. So that's another real big advantage in Mexico. And it's just to be able to get in and see somebody and have it done. No problem.
Great to interview. Seriously. Like you've been doing this your whole life. You should get a TV station. I find it really hard to talk to the camera.
I don't find it hard to talk to anything. 3.
We have a very special guest today, Chuck Burton, who's been living in Mazatlán since. That is so.
A little windy
That's
too.
so reminiscent of video filming, right? Everything's fine, and then as soon as I push play on that thing, that's what happened.
I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains that